Welcome to the University of Kansas School of Law's CSO Bootcamp 3. My name is Meredith Wiggins, and I am the Assistant Director of Career Services. In this presentation, I will be discussing how to handle some common but difficult interview questions that you're likely to face in the interview process. To keep this presentation short, we'll focus on 5 interview questions that students most commonly tell us they struggle with. 1. The open-ended invitation to tell us about yourself. 2. Questions about your grades or academic performance. 3. Questions about your biggest weaknesses for the role. 4. Questions that address recent cases or clients specific to a firm. And 5. Finally, what questions you, the candidate, have for the interviewers. First up, the dreaded "tell us about yourself" question. Part of what this question tries to achieve is to put you at ease by letting you tell the interviewers who you are, as well as to see whether you're comfortable simply having a conversation. Students often say they struggle with how to respond to this question because they feel like everything they want to say is already on the resume and cover letter. That's understandable. But remember, your interviewer has read lots of resumes and cover letters, so your answer to this question can help jog their memories. Also, your interviewer may have changed at the last minute and not had a chance to read your documents closely, so you're providing helpful information either way. Students also say they struggle with this question because they don't know what's appropriate to include. Only school or work? Some personal details? To some extent, that's up to you. We've heard great answers that are very focused on past work and academic achievement, as well as great answers that throw in a couple of personal details. The most successful answers to this question use their time to craft a narrative that shows how your interests, values, and experiences have led you to where you are now. What's made you the kind of person that you are? And why is that person excited to start exploring the kind of roles that you're looking for now? Here's an example response to a "tell us about yourself" opening question. Notice that the speaker mentions some background traits that inform what she's looking for in a work environment, while also highlighting some relevant work experience and tying it to her legal academic experience thus far. The closing sentence about personal interests also gives the interviewers some topics they can discuss to get to know her better outside her work and school qualifications. Next up, questions about your academic performance. No matter how you performed, this question can feel tricky. If you performed strongly, you have to toe the line between confidence and overconfidence. And if you didn't perform as strongly as you expected to, you have to figure out how to talk about that without making excuses. If you performed well, you want to acknowledge that without coming across as braggy. Emphasize that you feel really fortunate to have performed as well as you did, and point out some of your favorite aspects of the semester, which classes excited you the most, which professors made a real impression, and so on. If your semester was more challenging, first of all, know that your grades do not define you, either as a person or as a future attorney, and don't apologize for your performance in the interview. Just acknowledge that you didn't perform at the level you hoped for. Provide a brief explanation of why you think that was, adapting to the rigor of law school, managing caring for children or family members, etc., and then focus the rest of the answer on how you have responded to the challenge, changing your study habits, meeting individually with professors, and so on. If you did perform well in a class or classes that overlaps with the areas of law practiced by the employer you're speaking with, emphasize that. And remember, many of the interviewers with whom you'll be speaking were not at the top of their class throughout law school, and they have gone on to have interesting and fulfilling careers. They'll understand where you're coming from. Another tough question deals with your weaknesses as a candidate. This question is designed to get at 3 things. 1. Do you have a realistic sense of yourself as a candidate? 2. Have you been proactive in addressing your shortcomings? And 3. Frankly, are you going to try to BS the answer? In the past, many people recommended picking a weakness that was actually a strength, being too hard of a worker or too dedicated to a cause. We don't recommend this because it often ends up sounding like you're trying to weasel out of answering the question. Instead, pick something that you've genuinely struggled with and talk about it in a measured and professional way. And most importantly, make sure to include the steps that you've taken to address the weakness. For example, if you struggle with time management, you might talk about how you've made it a daily practice to block time for certain kinds of tasks and set alarms to help you stay on track throughout the day, which has greatly improved your ability to stay on top of your workload. Sometimes you'll be asked a question to which you honestly don't know the answer. Maybe you forgot to research or didn't think to research the issue at hand, or maybe you just draw a blank. It happens. The most important things in these situations is how you respond. I don't know on its own is not enough of an answer. Instead, briefly address the question asked and then pivot to respond to a related question that you do have an answer to. For example, if you are asked to talk about a given organization's recent clients or cases and you don't know what to say, you can say something like, "Unfortunately, I'm not familiar enough with your recent clients and cases to be able to really comment on them, but I'm very interested in your firm's commitment to serving the more rural aspects of Kansas, or your pro bono program, or another relevant aspect." Or maybe you can think of an older case, just not a recent one. Then you can take the approach that I don't have a new case in mind off the top of my head, but I'm definitely interested in case XYZ because it directly intersects with an area of practice that we studied in my fall classes. This kind of response demonstrates that you have knowledge of the organization and the ability to think on your feet. Interviews nearly always conclude by offering you time to ask any questions that you might have about the organization. The employer expects you to have questions for them, so make sure you've prepared a few strong, specific questions about life at the firm, the types of programs they offer, projects you could expect to be working on, and so on. This shouldn't be information that you can easily Google or read off of the employer website. You want to ask questions that require some level of insight. Think less, what are your major practice areas, and more, what practice areas are seeing the most growth at your firm right now? Sometimes you will find that you have prepped great questions and they've all been answered in the course of the interview. If that happens, when the interviewer asks what your questions are, try saying something like, we've actually covered most of them. I had planned to ask about X, Y, and Z. This shows that you did in fact have questions prepared. Then add, but something else I'd love to know more about is dot dot dot, and follow up on something mentioned earlier in the interview, or ask the interviewers to share more of their own experience about working with the firm. This demonstrates both preparation and flexibility. A few things to keep in mind as you prepare for potentially difficult interview questions. You will have a much easier time answering difficult questions if you have thoroughly prepared yourself for the interview by researching the organization. Knowing the employer's core values can help you select the strongest examples to use in your answers. You don't have to pretend that you've never made mistakes or struggled in the past. The strongest candidates are those who can thoughtfully assess their own performance and who demonstrate the ability to work through problems. And you can't show off those skills if you pretend you've never dealt with a challenge. And finally, know that the interviewers have been where you are now. They know the nerves you may be feeling and they want you to succeed. When in doubt, remember that a successful interview isn't one where you get the job. It's one where you represent yourself to the best of your ability. Approach interviews not as a high stakes, all or nothing interaction, but as a chance to learn more about an organization that interests you, and you'll automatically be in a better, calmer mindset for interviewing. Here are links to a few additional resources that can help you prepare for interviews with legal employers. While you certainly don't need to prepare answers for every question on these lists, they provide a good overview of the types of questions that you can expect. I hope this presentation has been helpful as you prepare for your upcoming interviews. Feel free to contact the CSO with additional questions, and as always, rock chalk.